Arlo and Frank. It's your grandpop again. And as I explained in the last video that I did, I have to sit here all day and all night because I have an ankle injury. It's easy for me to say. I have an ankle injury, and Grandmom will not let me do anything but sit with my leg up. So that's what I'm doing. And I'm making a couple videos, drinking a couple beers. I want to tell you tonight about my honeymoon. Now, in April of 2001, I had been dating your grandmother for almost 2 years. Our first date was in mid-July, because it was right after her birthday. In mid-July in 1999. So, April of 2001, I had bought a ring. I went to a Phillies game. It was a businessman's special. She didn't go to it. She's not a fan of sports. And on the way to that game, I stopped and got the ring that I had bought for her, and it was being made up. The engagement ring. Out someplace in Upper Darby where she lived, and the game was at Veterans Stadium in Philadelphia. So I went to the shore, and your grandmother and Aunt Courtney were there. We had been dating. She knew your great-grandparents. My mom, your great-nana, was kind of disabled at the time. I think she had dementia. Nobody ever diagnosed her with that, but she wasn't, let's put it this way, she was cognitively impaired. But Grandpa, he was not spry. He had a few years on him, but he and your grandmother had a good relationship, and your great-grandfather loved Courtney, loved him some Courtney. So I got to the shore, and I said to Roz, to my wife, your grandmother, hey, let's go for a little walk. It was cold out. She got all bundled up. I didn't, because it wasn't that cold out. And I walked her down to the pavilion at 88th and the beach, right around the corner from our house, and asked her if she would be my wife. And for some reason, maybe she was drinking that night, or maybe she just had a lapse of judgment, but she said yes. So she said, well, what do we do now? And I said, well, we figure out when we're going to have the wedding. And I said, that's whatever you want, you just run with it. And so the next thing you know, she said, well, we'll get married next April in a year. That'll give us time to get everything together that we need to get together. We'll go on our honeymoon after that. I said, where do you want to go? And she said, oh, I don't know. I hadn't thought about it. I didn't know that you were going to ask me to marry you tonight. So I said, well, let me ask a bunch of people where they would go, and maybe somebody will come up with a good spot. And people gave me all kinds of good suggestions, people at work, people that I knew, people that I was in ministry with and stuff like that. one person said Sedona, Arizona, and that would have been nice. Another person said Big Sur in California. We had people say, oh, Niagara Falls, my parents went there, and I wish I had gone there on my honeymoon. That's the big honeymoon spot in North America. But I was always interested in a place called Biarritz in southwest France. And the reason is because they call it the California of France. It's a big surf area. And I thought, it's going to be beautiful. And wouldn't it be cool to go surfing in France? Now, your grandmother isn't a surfer. And I started to look at a newsletter that I got back then about marathons. And I ran marathons. I had done probably at that time 30 marathons. I stopped at 46. But at that point in time, by the time I got back from my honeymoon, I probably had about 30 under my belt. And right around the time that we planned on going, because we had a date specific for our wedding, and it was exactly a year after I proposed to her. And I think that was April 4th. Could figure it out by looking at the Phillies' schedule for that year, but I'm not going to do that. So we were going to get married on April 4th, and then we were going to head out and go on our honeymoon. And we figured a week, 8 days, something like that. We were both working at the time. We didn't make a ton of money, but we did okay. And so we could afford to go to a pretty cool place, but we couldn't afford to stay forever. So we decided to go to Paris. And from Paris, fly to Paris and then get on another plane and fly to Biarritz. And then I said, how about if we go to London? Or I'm sorry, let me back this up a bit. 1 week apart was the Paris Marathon and the London Marathon. And I think the way that it worked was Paris was on the 7th of April and London was on the 14th. And I said to her, do you mind if I run the Paris Marathon? And she said, yes, I mind. Because we're going to go over there. We're going to leave on the 4th. We're going to get there on the 5th. You're going to run this thing on the 7th. Then we're going to Biarritz. And you're going to be just wiped out. You'll be hobbling around because she knew me well enough. She had been places with me where I ran races. And I mean, I'm destroyed physically after doing 26.2 miles. She said, I don't want to walk around with somebody crippled with, all stiff and can't stand up and all that stuff. So I said, well, how about if we add a trip to London at the very end, add a couple days, and I run the London Marathon, and then early the next morning, we get on a plane and come home from London. So she said, okay, that'd be cool. Neither of us really necessarily wanted to go to London. We wanted to go to France. But I wanted to run a marathon in Europe. I figured I'll never have another opportunity to do that, so I need to do it now. And she said, okay. I put in for it. It was something where it's a charity event, the London Marathon. They wanted you to raise 5,000 pounds for charity. And if you did that, you were guaranteed to get in. And if you did less than that, and I was doing nothing. I ran enough races that I never asked people to give to it. I never gave extra money. I would just pay whatever it cost to get in the race, and then that was it. I would run the race. And that's what I was doing there. And I put in for it. I waited. It was getting closer to the time. And I said, oh, this sucks. Now we're booking all this stuff. I'm going to go to London, and I'm not in this thing. I'm not going to get to run a marathon. So I got a phone card, and I got on the telephone and called. It was a chartered accountant group that was running the thing. And I talked to this like snarky guy, some accountant. And accountants can be snarky, trust me. And I said, I put in for this and I haven't heard from you. And you were supposed to let me know by a specific date. And I haven't heard from you. So what's the deal? And he said, well, I guess you didn't get in if you didn't hear from us. So I said, thank you very much. And got off the phone with him. And I told your grandmother. And I said, listen, I want to run a marathon. I want to run Paris. I didn't get into London. And she said, why would I let you do that? Because when you're married, like you have a contractual obligation to each other, but it's almost like you own each other. Like you could say no to the other person. You don't usually do that, but you can say like, no, I'm not going to let you do that. Just like your grandmother won't let me walk around right now. She said, why would I let you do that? And I said, you'll get a long weekend in Paris. So I put in for the Paris Marathon and was immediately accepted in it. Here's the finisher's medal. You can't really see it, but hey. And we got with the travel agent and hooked up, leaving early. Like I think we were leaving right after the wedding. Getting to Paris early, being there. At marathons, you usually go the day before, pick up your race packet. It's got your number and t-shirt and all that stuff. So we got like a long weekend there. Then we were going to go to Biarritz and then go to London it was almost like 2 days. Because I think we got there Saturday during the day. I ran the race Sunday. I'm giving away the end of the story. And then Monday we were going to head home. Well, what happened the day after I applied to Paris, I received my congratulatory letter from the London Marathon saying that I had gotten in. So I was going to run 2 marathons. I had already signed up for both of them. They both had cashed my check. And for better or worse, I was going to do that. So on my honeymoon, I went surfing. I rented a board for 2 hours, went out into the surf, had a great time, came back. Grandmother was there. She went shopping. She bought me one of those hats, those black hats that you have the cigarette holder and the hat, the French thing. A real one of those hats. And I went surfing. But before that, I ran the Paris Marathon. When we were in Paris, I figured, now I'd never been to Paris. I didn't know anything about it. I figured it was filled with Frenchmen, and Frenchmen were like people that look like me and speak French. So we got into the middle of Paris, and it was a lot of people that looked like your grandmother, and a lot of people that looked like Arabs, and all people from the old French Empire that moved to the imperial capital. They moved to Paris from wherever. Places in the Caribbean, Martinique, Guadeloupe, places like that. But I did find a place that only had white people in it. Now, when I say only had white people in it, that's kind of a lie, but let me explain. So I thought, we're going to a place that's lily white, and I'm married to a black woman. I found a blues club. Now, I like the blues. Grandmother likes jazz, not necessarily the blues, but I didn't find a jazz club. And the blues club said, we only have genuine American, or genuine African American performers, blues performers that, that play here. So I ordered 2 tickets, had them mailed to me. We got there, and everybody in the audience, except for your grandmother, was white. Now, we were in a city filled with all different colored people. There were plenty of people that looked like me, but there were also plenty of people that looked like her. But apparently, none of the people that looked like her were fans of the blues, because it was a place filled with white people. Now, I thought it was an American white thing, that American whites didn't know how to clap. They would clap on 1 and 3 instead of 2 and 4. But it's a racial thing. White people just don't know how to clap. They were doing a song called Oh Happy Day, and as soon as the guy that was on stage singing stopped clapping and started doing whatever else he was doing, all the white people would fall from 2 and 4 into 1 and 3, because we just can't help it. I set it up so that we did too much walking, and we didn't go to the places that your grandmother wanted to go to, like the Louvre, because I thought, well, that probably sucks. And I ran the race on Sunday, and then we took the Channel to London after spending a few days there. I'm sorry. From there, we flew to Biarritz. I did Biarritz. Then we came back to London on a train. I think we stayed one night that time, and then took the Channel to London. And I ran that marathon. They were both really, really cool races. So different. Paris started on the Champs-Élysées. They have a shot that they took that day that I have hanging on a wall up in grandmother's study above the Champs-Élysées of, I think it was 29,000 little tiny heads lined up getting ready for the starting gun. I always line up at the very back, so I'll always point, if somebody's looking at that picture with me, I'll point to one of the little heads and go, that's me right there. But I have no idea which one's me. The race went past beautiful places in Paris, but it also went out into kind of industrial areas. It's very hard to run through a city for 26 miles, even 13 miles sometimes, depending on the city, and have it just go through the city. If they did that in Paris, you'd be going up like horrible hills, like if you went up by Sacré-Cœur and all those places, and you would be tying up traffic. Because like it took me, I think, 5.5 hours to do Paris, and then it took me around 6 hours to do London. Excuse me. Paris was people on the side going, allez, allez, allez. Very, very focused on, go, go, go. It wasn't festive at all. But contrast to that was London. London started at the prime meridian where the clocks are set around the world based on. There's like the universal clock there, and it's Greenwich Mean Time. It's in Greenwich, which is in London, along the Thames. It started there, ran along the Thames, went across a couple bridges. There went past a ton of pubs, and on top of the pubs would be bands playing. Like I said before, it was a charity event. I guess it still is. Everybody was dressed up in costumes. I wasn't. I remember one group of guys were dressed up as the rainforest. People would have buckets, and the folks lined up along the route would throw money into their buckets. So if you can, it's hard enough to run 26.2 miles. But if you wind up with half a Homer bucket filled with coins, like, that's insane. Two things that I remember most about it was there was a guy in it that had the Queen of England, and she just died just within the last couple of weeks. Queen Elizabeth II just died. He had a Queen Elizabeth II mask on and just a running singlet and what appeared to be running shorts, but he would pull the flap up with, it had a flap in front of it. And the front of his running shorts turned into the Union Jack, the British flag. And people were going crazy on the side. They were going, oh, Your Majesty. They were bowing down to this guy, and he's going up. And he had like a scepter, and he would go over and tap people on the head and knight them and all this kind of crazy stuff. And he did all that. And he was an old guy, too. At this point in time, I was in my mid-40s. This guy had to be like my age now. And he did all that, and we were still running the same pace. And that went on for a long time. So I had a great time with him. And the other thing that I remember, I wore a singlet that said Runners for Christ. It's an organization that I guess I still belong to it. And in fact, the guy that runs it is here in Jacksonville. His name's David Morris. We're friends on Facebook. I went and did praise and worship with him at one of the 3 Marine Corps marathons that I ran in Washington, D.C. But I had their singlet on, red, like blazing red with white letters, Runners for Christ. And it ended fairly close to Buckingham Palace in this area that was like wide open. A ton of people could be there, and a ton of people were. And there were these guys out there witnessing to people about Jesus. And I went up and I said, there was a guy with a bullhorn, and he got done saying whatever he was saying on the bullhorn. And I didn't really listen. I just walked up. As I was coming into the end, I saw, hey, this guy's talking about Jesus. You need to be saved. That's really cool. So I walked over, and he stopped speaking. And I said, listen, I just want to thank you. And he said, what do you want to thank me for? I said, for being out here doing this. And he said, well, why aren't you out here doing this? And I said, well, I don't live here. I came here to run the marathon. I'm happy that you're here. I'm a believer. I love Jesus. And I just wanted to thank you for being here. And the guy went, oh, so you think because you run the London Marathon wearing a Jesus t-shirt that counts for something? And I said, no, I just wore the shirt. And the guy started to lay into me, and I just went like, hey, man, just forget it. Just forget it. Go back to doing what you're doing. And just then, grandmother came up and was like, what's up with that guy? I said, let's just get out of here. Let's get out of here. So that's the story of my honeymoon. Peace out, guys.